Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep into industrial and organizational psychology, or IO Psych. We're checking out the scene at CU Denver back in '97.
Yeah, 97. We dug up this research report from the International Journal of Selection and Assessment.
It's like a time capsule, right? Giving us this snapshot of their IO program.
It is. And you know what stood out to me? They weren't just teaching theory.
Right. They wanted their students to actually use it.
Yeah, like get out there and apply it in the real world. They
Yeah.
train them to be researchers and evaluators, consultants too.
Ready to make a difference.
Exactly.
And speaking of making a difference, the report mentions that their grads were landing jobs quickly,
Oh yeah, they were in demand.
doing assessments, personnel research, some even worked for city governments,
And get this, some went on to get PhDs,
at big-name schools too.
like Berkeley and Colorado State.
Oh, so we're talking top-notch program.
For sure. And it was competitive, too. To even get in, you needed a stellar GPA.
Oh, I bet. And what about GRE scores?
High. Really high, according to the report.
So attracting the best and then shaping them into these sought-after professionals.
That's the idea.
Makes you wonder, what was their secret?
Well, the report breaks down 5 research programs they had running back then.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me. What was the first one?
It was all about power dynamics, like in organizations.
You see, what was it called?
Social power and influence in organizations. They wanted to understand how people see power.
Like what makes someone seem powerful?
Exactly. And how those perceptions affect how people try to influence each other.
You know, the tactics they use.
Yeah, exactly. They were also looking at different power structures.
And how those structures impacted the whole organization.
You got it. They were already making some really interesting findings back then.
Like what?
Well, one study they talked about debunked a stereotype.
Oh, tell me more.
It was about women in management.
Okay.
They found that when women used the same influence tactics as men,
In the same roles, right?
yep, they were evaluated similarly.
Interesting. So it's not that women lead differently, but maybe they face different pressures or expectations.
Yeah, maybe that's why they sometimes choose different approaches.
It shows how this research can challenge what we think we know about gender and leadership.
Right. And hopefully make things more fair.
I'm really liking this. What other research areas did they dive into?
Let's see, the next one was about hiring.
The ever-important hiring process.
Personnel selection, they called it, making sure you get the right person for the job.
No small feat. What were they looking at specifically?
Well, they were exploring moderated multiple regression.
I'll be honest, statistics aren't my strong suit. Can you explain that?
Imagine baking a cake.
Okay, I'm with you.
You have all these ingredients, right?
Flour, sugar, eggs.
Exactly. And they all work together if you just focus on one.
You miss the big picture.
Yeah, you miss how they all interact. So this statistical technique,
Helps them see the whole cake.
in a way, yes, they were looking at all these different factors involved in hiring.
To see if anything was creating bias.
Right. Like maybe a certain test was giving an unfair advantage or disadvantage.
Makes sense. So it was like a tool to help them be more fair and accurate.
That was the goal.
But it wasn't foolproof, I imagine.
You got it. They actually found that even with fancy stats.
Human judgment is still crucial.
You can't just blindly trust the numbers. You need to think critically.
Use your brain.
Exactly. And speaking of critical thinking, their third research program was all about that.
Oh, meta.
Right. It was called Applied Research Methods. They were exploring ways to actually improve research itself.
So questioning the very tools they were using. That's pretty cool.
I know, right? One of the things they looked at was the bogus pipeline.
What in the world is that?
Basically, it's this sneaky technique.
Lay it on me.
They'd convince people they had this super accurate lie detector.
But it was fake.
Totally bogus.
So what was the point?
The idea was, if people think they'll be caught lying, they're more likely to be honest.
Even about sensitive stuff.
Yeah, and it worked for some things. Like, they found it helped when they were studying smoking.
But not for everything.
Right. It wasn't so effective for alcohol or marijuana use.
Huh. That's strange. Why would people lie about some things and not others?
It's a good question, right?
Human behavior is complex.
You said it. Now, their fourth research program focused on training.
Training, that's huge.
It is, especially in the workplace. It was all about training evaluation.
So figuring out what training programs actually work.
Yeah, and how to prove that they're worth the investment. They were actually critiquing a traditional model for this.
What model?
Kirkpatrick's hierarchy. They argued it was outdated.
In what way?
Well, they said it didn't really consider how people actually learn.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So what was their alternative?
They were pushing for a more cognitive science-based approach.
So like understanding the brain.
Yeah, the actual mental processes behind learning.
That's fascinating. So they were going beyond just asking, did you like the training?
Exactly. They wanted to know, are people really grasping the material?
And they were using their understanding of how the brain learns to do that.
Yeah, they gave this example of comparing two approaches to engine diagnostics training. One was this concept learning approach, and the other was more trial and error.
So showing how different learning styles could be more effective depending on the situation.
Exactly.
This all ties in nicely with their fifth research program, right? Which was about how to assess what people actually know
You're right on track.
instead of just testing their memorization skills.
Yeah, cognitive assessment, they called it. And they were doing some cutting edge stuff.
Give you some examples.
One technique they highlighted was called Pathfinder. It's a way to map out someone's knowledge,
Map it out. How?
like a network of concepts, showing how they all connect in someone's mind.
So like a visual representation of how their brain is organizing information.
Pretty much. It gives you a much deeper understanding of how people think. And they were even starting to apply this to teams.
To see how teams develop a shared understanding.
Yeah, those shared mental models. They mention air traffic controllers as an example.
High-stakes stuff.
For sure. You can see how these 5 research programs, even though they were each focused on different things,
They were all connected by this underlying interest in the human mind.
and how to apply that understanding to real-world problems.
It sounds like CU Denver's I/O program was really thriving back in '97.
Oh, yeah. A real hub of activity and innovation. They were pushing the boundaries.
But I'm curious, how did all this research actually get out of the lab? How did they make it useful for organizations?
That's where the Center for Applied Psychology, or CAP, comes in.
Okay, so tell me all about CAP and how they bridged that gap between research and the real world
They were like the bridge between the research happening at the university,
and the actual needs of organizations out there in the world.
right?
So what kinds of things was CAP involved in?
Well, they did a lot of service audits for organizations.
Service audits. Like, what does that even mean?
Basically, they were helping these organizations figure out how to improve their customer service.
Oh, I see. Make things better for the people they serve.
Exactly. Like, they did one for this international consulting firm
Okay.
and even a veterinary hospital.
A vet hospital. Interesting.
It shows they worked with a pretty wide range of clients.
So using I/O principles to make things better for everyone, not just employees.
Yeah. They also did program evaluations.
What's that? Like assessing whether a particular program is working.
Right. Like, is it achieving its goals? They did one for the Colorado Youth Services Program.
Okay, that sounds important. Especially for government agencies. They need to make sure their programs are effective.
Absolutely. And they were even involved in education and training, too.
Really?
They hosted a conference on distance learning and multimedia education.
Wow, back in '97. That was pretty cutting edge.
It was. And think about how relevant that is today with all the online learning we do.
It's like CU Denver was ahead of its time.
For sure. They also evaluated a curriculum redesign. The Air Force Academy, their civil engineering program.
Wow, they were working with some high-profile clients. So what were they looking at with the curriculum?
Well, the report mentions this thing called a construct first, design later approach.
Construct first, design later. What's that?
It means you figure out what you want students to learn before you even start designing the curriculum.
Oh, interesting. So you're being really intentional about the learning goals from the very beginning.
Exactly. And then they were measuring how this approach impacted the students.
Like, did it actually help them learn better?
Yeah, they looked at student attitudes towards the program, their grades,
Okay.
and even how they performed as officers later on.
Wow, so they were tracking the long-term effects of the curriculum redesign.
It shows you how committed they were to evaluating their work. It wasn't enough to just make changes.
He wanted to make sure those changes actually made a difference.
Exactly.
You know, hearing about all this, the research, the work with CAP, it really paints this picture of this dynamic I/O program at CU Denver, like all these pieces working together.
It's impressive, right?
And inspiring. It makes you wonder what lessons we can take from this little trip back to 1997.
Oh, totally. What can we learn from their approach and apply to today's world?
I think that's a great question to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
I agree. We can connect the dots and see how these ideas from the past might help us shape the future of work and learning. Welcome back. So we've been on this journey back to 1997.
Checking out CU Denver's IO Psych scene.
It's been a blast from the past, right?
It has. And it's amazing how much of what they were working on then is still so relevant now.
I know. It just shows you how solid those fundamental IO principles are.
Like they were already tackling things like cognitive assessment back then,
Trying to understand how people really learn, not just memorize.
which is more important than ever these days, right?
Totally. In today's world, things are changing so fast. Skills and knowledge, they're constantly evolving.
So it's less about what you know and more about how you learn.
Exactly. Being able to adapt and problem solve.
Think critically.
All those good things. And their research on power dynamics.
Oh yeah, that was fascinating.
Super relevant today, don't you think?
In this crazy interconnected world,
Totally.
like that study about women and influence tactics.
I was just thinking about that.
It reminds us not to jump to conclusions.
Yeah, like maybe women aren't less effective leaders.
Right. Maybe they just face different pressures that make them choose different tactics.
We need to question our assumptions.
Look for evidence, not just rely on our gut feelings or stereotypes.
I like that.
And remember the Center for Applied Psychology.
CAP, yes.
They were all about taking that research and putting it into practice.
Service audits, program evaluations. They even hosted a conference on distance learning.
Way back when.
It's inspiring to see them making a real difference.
I agree. Bridging that gap between research and the real world. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's think about what this all means for our listeners.
Right. What can we learn from CU Denver's IO program?
What can we apply to our own lives?
We've talked about so many cool things. The bogus, pipeline, pathfinder, that concept learning approach to training.
There are so many takeaways here.
Think about how you can use these ideas to be a better learner.
Make better decisions.
Understand your own workplace better.
But beyond the specific techniques, there's a bigger takeaway here, right?
Absolutely.
It's about the power of scientific thinking.
Questioning assumptions.
Looking for evidence.
That was the foundation of CU Denver's IO program.
And it's something we can all benefit from.
For sure.
So as you go about your week, your month, even your year, think about what we've talked about.
Be curious, be critical,
And never stop learning.
because that's how we grow.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into IO psychology.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking questions.